Good afternoon. This is Kiana, and today we are speaking about my state sponsored theory of radicalization and how this ties into the recent incident where a perpetrator attempted to unalive former President Donald Trump. Now, there have been a lot of conspiracy theories and speculation about why this perpetrator made the attempt to unalive former President Donald Trump, which I will not get into in this particular video. But what I find most interesting is that some of the commentary that is seen online has to do with whether or not Secret Service was surveilling the right building. For example, there have been uh, a number of commentary and arguments that the rooftop that the perpetrator was on was supposed to be actually surveilled by Secret Service, and that wasn't the case in this particular situation. And to add to this argument, what I'm hearing is that this was an outdoor event. It was a rally, and such events and situations warrant extra scrutiny and surveillance because of this wide open area. So it's not a closed in area. And so these threats can come from different angles. And it is very questionable, is what I'm hearing, as to the reason as to why this particular rooftop was not surveilled, or why Secret Service wasn't on top of it. Now, it's important for us at this point to really denounce and condemn radicalization and extremism in all of its forms, because especially when radicalization turns violent. And we need to take the opportunity to do this because what it leads to is it leads to situations that happened last week that happened to former President Donald Trump. And no matter what you think about the former president's uh, opinions and his beliefs, which I disagree with most of the things that Donald Trump says, if not all of the things that is coming from the Republican Party, that does not give anybody the right to try and take his life. So, the first argument that we are going to listen to is the argument from a distinguished professor, Allan Lichtman. And basically, what Dr. Lichtman states is that this incident goes beyond an attempt to assassinate the president. This has to do with an epidemic of gun violence in the United States. Now, I agree with Professor Lichtman in part, and I'll get into why I agree and why I uh, take issue with what he is saying. So let's listen to him now.
We have seen in the past.
It is fundamentally different. It is an assassination attempt consistent with the epidemic of gun violence in America today. All those other attempts or successes that you pointed out were aimed at the individual. This was a mass shooting with multiple victims. That separates it out from the history that you have pointed out. And unfortunately, mass shootings are as common as the sunrise in America. We have a mass shooting every single day.
So there you heard it. Professor Lichtman states that he feels that this is fundamentally different from the past assassination attempts on our former presidents or our sitting presidents, that this has to do with the epidemic of gun violence. And he states that he believes that what makes this difference is that it was a mass shooting, that more than one person was shot in this particular incident. Uh, and he goes on to say that, of course, we have mass shootings every single day in the United States, which is true, and which is an unfortunate and frightening reality. But where my opinions are diverging from Professor Lichtman is that this particular situation with Donald Trump was uh, in a rally. So, of course, there were several people that were there. Former President Donald Trump was not alone in this situation. So, yes, there was a potential or there was a probability that he wasn't going to be the only person that was going to be the victim of this violence. So I diverge from Dr. Lichtman's arguments there is that it is quite the same. So my argument is that this can be uh, this could be in alignment with other incidents that we have seen in the past. The only thing that makes this particular situation differently from those past incidents is that this took place in an outdoor rally with multiple people. So when you think about it, and when we're reviewing the evidence, former President Donald Trump was outdoors and he was very close to the audience. So when the perpetrator was aiming at former President Donald Trump, there was a high probability that it wasn't only going to be former President Donald Trump that was going to be, hit by this gun violence. And I think that that's what Dr. Lichtman is refusing to acknowledge. In those past situations, as we have seen, that a person had a closer uh, view of their target. They had a close. So, for example, these presidents that were in view, they were closer to the perpetrator, and so the perpetrator had a closer eye on them and were able to either attempt to assassinate them or to complete the assassination in this regard. So I think that this is where Dr. Lichtman is failing to actually acknowledge that, yes, this was a mass shooting, but it was also a attempt on the life of a former sitting president that could fundamentally change the election. Now, whether or not it will or not remains to be seen, but most people think that it will. Let's listen to the second argument.
Both sides.
Who is
I want
also
people to
reported
trust
to
their eyes.
who is also reported to have donated to Biden. So we don't know yet the full motivation. We don't
yes,
know.
Yes,
Well,
I
fine.
know.
Look, he was a Biden donor and a registered Republican. We don't know what his motivation
I'm just
was.
telling you the facts. I'm telling you the facts. I didn't
But if
say
you're trying
MAGA.
to,
I didn't say he was a Trump supporter.
with respect, if you're trying to explain to me that obviously it was a Republican who did this because he killed the Republican candidate to be president, I've got a slight problem with your logical thinking there.
So as we can see, Piers Morgan has taken umbrage with the argument that is put out by Wajahat Ali. Now, shout out to Wajahat Ali. He did a phenomenal job of standing his ground in that argument and defending himself in a room full of conservatives. So, shout out to him. But I think that Piers Morgan makes a very interesting and important point is that the perpetrator was registered as a Republican. So why would a registered Republican who is holding conservative beliefs, now we know that reports show that the perpetrator had Republican beliefs, why would that person who has these beliefs attack a person who has the same beliefs that they have? It is an argument and an issue and a question that warrants further elaboration, which will not happen in this particular video. But I will say that this is twofold. On one hand, I agree with Piers Morgan, and I'll tell you why, and I'll show you. In the past, I wrote an article about examining the inconsistencies why the US government's portrayal of the Kim Brady case lacks credibility. Now, if you don't know about this particular case, Kim Brady was a perpetrator who used gun violence and attacked a Black neighborhood, and this was quite unfortunate. And so the arguments that was put out there by the media was that Kim Brady was a Black Lives Matter and Kim Brady was anti-gun. And I held the same position that Piers Morgan held. I was like, wait a minute, there's something strange about this case. There's something that does not make sense. And so what I said was, to begin with, it has been alleged that Kim Brady was a supporter of the Black Lives Matter movement. However, if we assume that Kim Brady had extremist tendencies, as it is claimed, it is highly unlikely that their first target would be Black Americans. Black Lives Matter, their core purpose is to advocate for justice and equality for Black lives. So it is contradictory to suggest that a supposed Black Lives Matter supporter would target the very community that they claim to support. With that said, I stated that no individual should be exposed to an act of gun violence on the basis of their skin color, gender identity, sexual orientation, or religious beliefs. So again, the media reports were telling us that Kim Brady was a Black Lives Matter supporter, and I just didn't believe it. I just didn't believe these reports. Now, the media was also telling us that Kim Brady was transgender, which turned out to be false. And so what I said was, conflicting reports regarding Kim Brady's gender identity raises doubts about their transgender status as an individual. And the reason why this is because there were reports, especially from Kim Brady's grandmother, who stated that Kim Brady was a gay male, not a transgender person. It did not identify as transgender. And Kim Brady, I believed, lived with his grandmother. So that was another inconsistency that we were being, funneled by the media, which was just quite unfortunate. There was also something else that was said in this particular case. What was that? Yeah, so again, on the trans status, the confidential source in the US claims that Kim Brady did not identify as a trans woman, but a male when booked into custody. So we know that if you if you're booked into custody, you're booked into jail, you're either going to identify as male, female, or transgender. And Kim Brady didn't identify as transgender. There was another fact in this case. Let's see. Okay, the other information that the media was telling us is that Kim Brady committed this act of violence because they wanted to address the issue of gun violence in the United States of America. And I was like, that doesn't make any sense because reports are stating that Kim Brady was a gun control advocate. So if Kim Brady is a gun control advocate, why would they resort to guns to address this violence? And this is what I said. The U.S. further alleges that Kim Brady stated that they committed the shooting to address gun violence. However, this assertion is highly questionable, as it goes against the principles of the gun control movement. Advocates for gun control, like Journey to the Center, so that's my blog, firmly believe in resolving issues through peaceful means and would never resort to violence or the use of firearms to further our cause. Therefore, such claims appear inconsistent with the beliefs of gun control proponents. So, as you can see, I agree with Piers Morgan's argument there that this is highly questionable for a conservative, someone with conservative beliefs, to one day wake up and say, hey, I think I want to do A, B, and C, or to find himself at a rally and try and take the life of former President Donald Trump. Now, let's play devil's advocate. We do know that at one point that the perpetrator did donate money to the Biden campaign. And after that particular situation, this particular individual, maybe their political beliefs evolved and they were interested more in conservative beliefs, found themselves more conservative and probably identified as a Republican and sought to register as a Republican, which evidence shows that they did. Now, could it be that this person evolved in their thinking and maybe one day decided that Trump was enough and that he was a threat to democracy and that the most extreme thing to do was to do what happened last week? Yeah, that is a possibility. And anything is possible at this point because we're not getting all the information that's out there. And I think that this is quite frightening. But at this point, we're working on the facts that we have in front of us. And that is that this person was donated to the Trump campaign. Excuse me. This perpetrator donated to the Biden administration or the Biden campaign. And then later he had conservative views and registered as a Republican. And from that point, we don't understand what happened. We don't understand what changed him from being a Republican and committing the act of violence that he committed on the day in question. So we're going to listen to our third argument by Wajahat Ali. Just a moment.
Insurrection?
You're not
There was
saying
no violent insurrection?
He was also a Biden donor. Okay, so continually refusing to acknowledge that doesn't mean you're giving me facts. It means you're giving me partisan political facts that suits your agenda.
Sure, let's acknowledge the fact he gave $15 also to a super PAC a couple years ago, and in the last 2 years he is a registered Republican, and we have to find out. I didn't say he's MAGA because we don't know. We have to find out the facts.
Thank you.
But
We
what
don't
I do
know. We don't know is the correct response. You trying to say
So
he's
I'm
one
glad-
of yours?
I'm glad.
You trying to say he's one of yours that did
You
it?
You guys just spent the last 30 minutes blaming the left. I'm just giving you facts,
Actually,
and
you've
I'm also
spoken
telling you
for
the facts.
half
Trust
of
your
it,
own eyes.
So.
So shout out to Wajahat Ali. But as we can see, Wajahat says is that he's not saying that the perpetrator is MAGA. And I don't think that that's what anybody is saying. We're saying that at the time of this particular incident, that the perpetrator was a registered Republican. But I don't think that this gives us any information into the perpetrator's motives or his intent. Again, I think that, in my personal opinion, I think that our government is keeping a lot of information from us, and that we're being given incorrect information to try and form in an attempt to shape our opinions, our attitudes, and our beliefs. For example, our government told us that the perpetrator was a person who was alone and that he was a lonely person. But we've seen video of him actually around friends and having a good time and associating with people around him. So we understand that the government can shape our opinions, and not only our personal opinions, not only the opinions of the audience or the citizen population, but also of the people that they are attempting to radicalize. And this brings me to my state sponsored radicalization theory. So, according to my theory, state sponsored radicalization theory, it's a form of state sponsored persecution. And it's where the state seeks to harm persons who are at a transitional time in their life and have experienced a traumatic event such as racism or discrimination, which causes them to have feelings of grievance or injustice or desire for political change. Now, under this theory, I argue that state agents will mistreat or exercise power over victims or group of marginalized persons through systems, institutions, governmental authority, or influence and or cultural opprobrium to lure the person into adopting a radicalized or extremist view in opposition of national security interest. Now, you may say, Kiana, why would the US want to radicalize this young person who was bullied and was alone? And the short answer is because it's easy. It's easy to do it. And this isn't a conspiracy theory, this is the fact. For example, there was past reports that The Intercept found that the U.S. tried to radicalize a young man. And I'm going to try and find that report right fast. Just a moment. Just a moment. Let's see if I can pull it up. The Intercept. Yes, so basically, okay, there was a story that was put out by The Intercept, and I might link it in the description if I can, how the FBI actually radicalized a young boy within the United States and had this person doing things that they never thought that they would want to do. Like, I think that they were actually entrapped and persuaded to do things that went against national security interest. And even though they really didn't want to do these things. So I think that this could be the issue in this case. We don't know. But let's move on. So I believe that what radicalization, especially when it is sponsored by the state, what it allows the state to do is to spread disinformation to portray specific victims as a threat to society. And often these victims include, but are not limited to, human rights defenders, activists, and journalists. So, what I think often happens is that in these cases of radicalization, and we won't be able to get to the entirety of this argument today, but what I think happens is that the state will find vulnerabilities, maybe because they're bored or they just need to try and test a particular situation, but they will try and find vulnerabilities in a specific person. And what they will do is that they will try and radicalize that person. And this can take place, this can happen through like a number of means. So, for example, with my state-sponsored theory of observational learning, I specifically say that this entails the government strategically allocating resources to prime the victim towards a curated set of preferences for observation, deviating from their innate inclinations. The aim is to foster radicalization and to adopt an extreme belief or behavior. So, how does this work? Well, the way that it works is maybe you have a person who is online and they look at something that may be contrary to the government or what the government feels. So, for example, a person could look at something from either Asia or China or Russia, and they might agree with it. And not because they are holding sentiments to those regimes, or not because that they are informants, or not because they're spies, but simply because maybe there was a salient point that was made. And when the government learns about this, what often happens is the government will try and radicalize the person. And this can happen through a number of ways. And one is through the state-sponsored theory of observational learning. So, through my research, what I discovered is that Western nations engaging in transnational repression will often employ this state sponsored theory of observational learning as a form of indirect oppression. And what they do is they use what I call diametric content saturation. Now, what is that? Diametric content saturation is when the victim's social media profiles, their streaming and email accounts uh, are inundated with an influx of opposing content, which may be provocative or violent, so that the victim can elaborate on the stimuli. Now, this is done by, of course, governmental agencies, along with not only governmental agencies, but transnational groups that are working on the behalf of governments. So, in a situation as this, with what we're seeing with the perpetrator in the Trump incident, is one question that we need to be asking ourselves is, was our government trying to radicalize this person? Was this person, uh, you know, was there an attempt to enact conversion uh, practices upon this person through diametric content saturation? Was that happening? So, for example, was this person attempting to? Uh, this is a good point here, so I want you to hold on to this. Was this person attempting to identify with conservative beliefs and identify as a Republican, but later, like, his content was actually inundated with all of the opposing content about Donald Trump, and did this result in the attack on the former president? These are all valid questions that have yet to be answered. In these situations, when we see that there is an attempt that we've seen last week, it raises significant questions and asks us to engage in further introspection. This video is going to end, so I want us to continue to think introspectively about these